A word of advice, don't break the law.
Percentage points from her peak usage, ranking her as the 6th worst for the Fall from Grace reward. Yoimiya also ranks the 6th worst in the Delta, losing a phenomenal 88.7% of her peak usage rate in Natlin. And finally, Yoimiya ranks the 10th worst for the post-Natlin ratio, being used at just 37.3% in Natlin compared to how much she was used in her pre-Natlin days. Now, our favorite fireworks pyromaniac, Yoimiya, has sadly joined our list of the most fallen off characters. At one point, she had a peak usage rate of 60%. Perhaps
let's hope you put up a good fight.
Here comes another.
The wind knows me.
Alas, I'm basing that on architecture. Anyway, Yoimiya was essentially out.
Let's finish this next time.
This was new.
Well, since then,
Let's finish this.
Here comes another.
One with nature.
As one with wind and cloud.
The wind knows me.
Aika lost her series 7% points from her usage, ranking her as the 3rd worst for the Fall from Grace reward. Aika was at 7, Delta, a Red Sox amount of 8.4% of her peak usage rate in Natlin.
One with nature.
Finally, Aika ranked the 7th worst in the Natlin ratio,
Into the wind.
just 25.4% in Natlin compared to how much she was used in her pre-Natlin days. Aika, when released, was an absolute monster, as no one prior to her came even close to having her bursts multipliers. And even through the Sumeru meta, Aika actually retained relevance, with a stellar peak performance of 71%. However, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, losing 62.7% of her peak usage. And her damage isn't what it used to be, and that's not even mentioning her issues against enemies that can't be frozen and that move even a tiny bit. Anyway, I do expect a cryo renaissance in the future, but as of making this video, Aika takes the 4th spot overall on this list. Number 3, Kokomi. Kokomi couldn't crit the meta and lost 68% from her peak usage, ranking her as the number 1 worst and thus winning the Fall from Grace reward. Woohoo! Kokomi 87.2% of her peak usage rate in Natlin. And finally, Kokomi ranks the 2nd worst for the post-Natlin ratio, being used at just 18% in Natlin compared to how much she was used in her pre-Natlin days. Personally, seeing Kokomi here pained me the most out of all the characters. Kokomi had a heartwarming underdog story, and she rose from the scorn of the community ire to become one of the most consistently used characters, at least for a while. Well, her descent began with, somewhat surprisingly, Furina, as Furina applies AoE
Let's get one with nature. Falling leaves. Storm my knights into the wind.
Healing was also only seen hard to other healers have a choice most of the time. So yeah, despite Kokomi's rise, she ended up falling off pretty hard. Way harder than her noodle attacks hit the enemy. The number 2 runner-up for the most fallen off character in Genshin Impact is Venti. Venti lost 31.2% peak usage faster than he could glide, ranking him at a reasonably modest 22nd worst for the Fall from Grace reward. Venti, however, ranks the 2nd worst in the Delta, losing 93.5% of his peak usage rate in Natlin. And finally, Venti ranks the 3rd worst for the post-Natlin ratio, being used just 18.4%. Oh boy, how the Archon has fallen. Venti was completely busted on release and remained quite relevant throughout Sumeru, being everyone's second choice for an anime character after Kazuha. Venti was a great option until, oddly enough, actually I think Furina's release. Furina preferred Jean as an anime support character for Jean's AoE healing, and with the release of Shilinin, that was the Signora slap that slapped Venti out of the meta, since Shilinin effectively provides the Viridescent Veneer buff to the team, which was pretty much the main reason you would use Venti. Oh right, I almost forgot to mention Venti group stuff. How could I have forgotten? Seems like Hoyoverse also forgot, because since Fontaine, almost nothing relevant can be grouped, and or characters just don't need grouping these days with their massive AoEs. So yes, size does matter, and sadly, Venti has fallen off. I've got two dishonorable mentions, Ayato and Child. Unfortunately, Nuvolette and Furina have had such a chokehold on the Hydro meta that these characters have fallen off harder than Child got wrecked by Nuvolette. Surprisingly though, these two's rankings in the fallen off categories wasn't as bad overall as the others. So that's why, in my opinion, they deserve honorable mentions. And number 1. Nilo. Nilo lost 66.9% peak usage, ranking her in second place as the runner-up for the Fall from Grace reward. Nilo ranked the worst, and thus the best, for the Delta reward, having lost 94.6% of her peak usage rate in Natlin faster than she can kill your own team. And finally, Nilo ranks the worst of all time for the post-Natlin ratio, being used just 11.7%
on my
in
back.
Natlin
Do me a favor and
compared
take 'em
to
off.
how much she was
Now it
used in
seems
her
like-
pre-Natlin days. So yeah, the number one character who's fallen off the most based on my totally accurate falling off of meter trademark pending is Nilo. Nilo won 2 of the falling off awards, and I guess pretty much no one is using her in Abyss 12 anymore. Abyss 12 has been full of beefy single targets, and usually only one side is hydro friendly, so that typically means people will use Nuvolette for that side. One of Nilo's best buddies, Kokomi, has also taken a big hit, and I do think it is directly correlated. Also, AoE fights, which is where Nilo excels, well, they're completely dominated by Nuvolette, so yeah, I kind of feel bad for Nilo, honestly. I'm sure there are plenty of other reasons for Nilo to be here on this list, but hopefully I've gotten to the core of the issue. So yeah, that's my top 8 list of characters that fell off the most. The spreadsheet will be available in the link down below for you all to develop an even better, totally accurate falling off a meter trademark pending, or just for whatever you want to do with it. Also, don't forget to check out today's sponsor down in the link below, as they make these types of videos possible. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.
Guess what I'm drawing today?
When the Pokemon franchise made a push into the 3D space for the first official time, Pokemon X and Y introduced a new typing to the game, Fairy type. This would mark the first instance the series has had a new typing in 13 years across 4 generations, with the last time being Generation 2 introducing Steel and Dark type. The Pokemon community at the time was both excited yet mildly concerned at the thought of a brand new type being added to the game, but all in all, I think the inclusion of Fairy made things a lot more enriching for Pokemon thereafter, considering it provided a measurable bump to older Pokemon like Clefable, Gardevoir, Togekiss, and Azumarill, along with the type itself being a veritable counter against the all-powerful Dragon type at the time. Introducing new things to the game can be small in nature, but have a knock-on effect across all of its systems that were established before that point. Adding a new weapon type, new class, what have you, has always been viewed as a major turning point for any game. Genshin Impact has its own empirical data to likely discredit the inclusion of Dendro, serving to not only introduce a new set of characters for us to collect, but also retroactively bumping the number of characters by nature, no pun intended, of the neuroelemental reactions that accompany them. Suffice to say, much of version 3's hype was a result of us getting a new element. Without it, I don't think Sumeru would have been as exciting as it was, which brings me to our topic for today. Over the past couple months, I think we were just talking about things like the time to recover the player base's declining goodwill towards the game, from revitalizing potentially forgotten areas like Mazda to introducing new updated forms to characters like Ningguang and Kaya, to improving and expanding on the game's overall experience in all aspects. 2 areas that I think might be helpful to that are 1. A drastic overhaul of the artifact system, which I plan to talk about in a separate video, and 2. Positing the idea of maybe introducing another element. Does Genshin Impact need more elements, or can adding more elements be beneficial for the game? We'll discuss that for today. One of the main ways gacha games, or
Thank
any
you
game
for
regardless of genre, maintains excitement and keeps things fresh is by implementing new universal systems over time. The most popular games of all time do this in some shape or form. Minecraft adds a new material type, new biomes, overhauls the systems, and whatnot, creating a far more extensive. Everything has to expand and add new things. If you don't constantly innovate, you'll eventually lose customers to products that do innovate. Some games have a tendency to be too cavalier with how they expand and innovate, leading to power and feature creep, which is something that gEnShit has been adamantly against over the years. But it's become clear that their refusal to evolve past the mechanics already present in the game is what makes the essential experience feel so formulaic and uneventful, despite them releasing new characters, new regions, and hosting new events over time. Expanding on new systems is a major way to overhaul the game and make players have to reevaluate what they know about it. Done correctly, it can broaden the scope of the game in a way that's constructive and engaging. When gEnShit brought Dendro into play, it was a shiny new gimmick that created tons of discussion over how strong it could be in the metagame, what characters got buffed from it, and what types of characters we have. Dendro reactions were so powerful at a base level, it gave rise to a number of free-to-play friendly teams. A Hyperbloom team of 4-star units was able to overpower most version 1 DPS characters at the time. And I would say version 3 was around the time team building went into high gear, building off version 2's foundation. It was great for equalizing the metagame at the time as well. Nowadays, with the exception of Cryo, I'd argue all elements are in more or less a decent position. Part of what elevated Electro as much as it did was Dendro. If not for Dendro, many Electro units would be far less effective than they are now.
I
Although
created
Shepard's
another
and Josuke do
universe
help
and
out a bit
founded
in terms of
paradise.
non-Dendro Electro
I-
usage. Like I said, an instrumental part of version 3's success was, among other things, the hype surrounding a brand new element added to the game. For 2 years before that, we've been settled into the 6 playable ones: Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, Animo, Electro, and Geo, and the meta that was built around them. When Dendro came out, all attention was focused on it. It was the first time Traveler was actually decent for once, as Electro, Geo, and Animo Traveler were all disappointing in the end. Additionally, having 2 extremely powerful Dendro 5-stars, a sub-DPS and main DPS, only added to the interest. Dendro would prove to become one of the most consistently strong categories too, with Kave being the only underwhelming one.
Co-pilot, I'm freaking out about the speech right now. How can I get it together?
Alright, simplify. Speak slowly. Own the
Too, with Kave being the only underwhelming one. Since then, I feel like the game hasn't really changed a whole lot from a fundamental perspective. Version 4 introduced a ton of unique playstyles and pushed the needle on what a character was capable of, trying out new strategies like Mono Pyro through Linny, HP manipulation through Verena, Neuvillette, and Risley, Geo finally getting some love through Navia and Chiori, the Overload reaction getting uplifted by Chevres, and Demily building off the once forgotten Burning reaction. But by and large, we're still operating within the same constraints that gEnShit has had since 2022. Version 5 tried to shake things up with the Night Soul system being more gameplay contingent than Arc Alignment was, but it's primarily contained to just the units that belong to Nama. Dendro was more all-encompassing. They tried to implement custom mechanics into characters like Chaska's Elemental Roulette, but those are character exclusive. If you don't pull the character, you don't get to experience the new stuff. Version 4 and 5 collectively saw a major boost in power scaling for gEnShit. A lot of that has to do with the game reaching a point where the only way for its new characters to stand out is to simply do more than what we have before. There was no possible way Mavrika could have gone about being a main attacker differently than simply just being stronger than the other DPS units. It's true we still have a lot more to cover as far as addressing mechanics.
Let's light it up! I'm going! Wind strike!
face your guilt. Let's begin.
But players, to the west, are losing interest in the game at a rapid pace. By then, it might already be too late. Gotcha is working on such long-term
Yes, sir.
Cat with Blue Hat actually made a video way back on how gEnShit might potentially have more elements, such as a light and dark element, or maybe something more dimensional like time and space, perhaps a void element. There have been theories on Honkai-style's quantum and imaginary elements possibly also being added to gEnShit. Then we have Dean's Leaf, who appears to make use of abyssal properties to attack.
Hey, so what's your favorite region? Oh, it's actually not one. Alright, seriously, what's your favorite region? No, I'm being for real. No, it's not. Today, friends, we're going to be talking about the popular, well, infamous region called Notland. Now, a lot of people hated this region, and I mean hate, I mean they loathed this region. I mean, they absolutely despise it with everything in their heart. I mean, people are pre-registering their hatred for Notland before it even came out, which is mighty impressive, I must say. And also, if they could remove any region from this game, it would be Notland. I mean, they want this region completely redone. They absolutely hated it. But before we go into the reasons, many many reasons why people dislike Notlin, I'm gonna give a quick little disclaimer. Now, of course, a bunch of what I'm gonna say is just gonna be people's opinions that I've seen online because I am severely chronically online and I am almost always online. I mean, if you check my screen time on my phone, you would be mildly concerned. You would look at my phone, look back at me, look back at my phone, and then just walk away and already have your entire idea.
Climbing strong. Out of my way. And trap. I hear everything.
I also want to say that if you like Notlin, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not taking things to heart. This is a bunch of people's opinion online, and it shouldn't reflect your opinion of Notlin itself. So if you like it, go ahead, by all means, love it, enjoy it. 5 minutes before the comment section, don't do that. Well, I do it too. Actually, no, you get what I mean. But either way, this is just people's opinions online, and of course, if you like Notlin, go ahead and like Notlin. But I'm just going to be highlighting the main reasons of what I've personally seen that people dislike the region for. So, let's get into it. Starting off with the most prominent and obvious reason, diversity. Now, this has been an ongoing issue in Genshin for a while, as players were always complaining about the diversity and lack of representation in Genshin, and this has been an ongoing problem since Sumeru. When Sumeru came out, people were expecting characters to have darker skin tone, or at least more of a tan, but players only received 2 characters like Sina and Dea with darker skin tone, and Candice as well, so sorry, 3 characters, and that wasn't enough since majority of the characters had white skin or pale skin, and players didn't really see the diversity or representation that they were hoping and expecting from this region. So a lot of players took to social media to say, oh, just wait for Notlin, there'll be darker characters then. And when Notlin came around, there wasn't that many darker characters. There was a lot of characters with whiter skin and not a lot of characters with melanin, and players were really mad about this as they were expecting more representation into the game. People were also mentioning characters like Yansan, and when people did a color analysis on her skin, it mainly came out gray with her skin tone, and players got even more mad at this. So this region already started off with a bad start, and players also complained about the NPCs as they were called stereotypical, or they just didn't have enough representation.
Can't see. I hear everything.
When the region first came out, so this already had the region off to a rocky start, so that is just one of the obvious reasons. Now, let's go to my next point, which is expectations. Now, when Notlin first dropped, players had such high hopes for this, considering the last region we explored or finished was Fontaine. Now, Fontaine was one of the most groundbreaking regions in Genshin, and players absolutely loved it. The story was great, the characters were great, the writing was just overall great, the design was beautiful, so players' expectations were through the roof. And when you have players' expectations through the roof, obviously, when expectations are too high, you have room for disappointment. That's exactly what Notlin got. Now, Notlin wasn't up to players' expectations as they were hoping with Fontaine, as Fontaine brought in underwater exploration and created this whole world underground. Players absolutely loved the exploration, and players absolutely loved it, so when Notlin rolled around, players were just kind of expecting more from the region, which I'll get into more the little issues that I've seen with the region that players have been complaining about. So again, when expectations are high, it leaves a lot of room for disappointment, which is why I think Notlin did so bad, is because of the expectations that Fontaine set. But of course, let me know your opinion on Fontaine, and let me know if you think expectations were a part of the reason why Notlin did so bad. Now let's talk about the characters itself. Now, from what I've seen, it was mainly a 50-50, well, not even a 50-50, I think it was a 60-40%. But players didn't really like the characters as they thought the characters weren't developed well. So what I mean by characters weren't well developed, I mean people absolutely didn't like how the characters were written and they thought they were kind of bland. For an example, Kinich, he was an okay character, but people just thought he was more of a basic character and didn't have much personality to him and thought they could have added a little bit more character depth to him. They compared him to Sasuke and stuff, and they just didn't like how boring he was, and I guess this could really be subjective as a lot of players really did like Kinich and thought he was well written, so this is kind of a 50-50, but I think since there was already ongoing hate for Notlin, people just hated the characters even more because of the fact that they were a part of the region. But there were also characters that people overall just disliked a lot.
All unplanned articles should be turned
people who
in.
even like Notlin just didn't like. And
Neither of
for
us
example,
saw anything
people
here,
didn't like
right?
Ororon. Now, Ororon was an interesting character to me, as when people first saw him, they were severely disappointed with his design, and if you haven't seen the memes, people really compared him to someone that shops at Hot Topic for a living and lives in Hot Topic, and his whole fit is Hot Topic, mainly because of the ripped skinny jeans and his overall outfit. And people also compared him to their old gacha designs with the different colored eyes and stuff, so players didn't really have much favor for his design at all and absolutely hated it. Now, players did like his personality as they were expecting one thing. They were expecting him to be mean, but he was actually pretty sweet. So I guess that kind of made people like him, but overall the design was... I think characters already disliked in the region. It just, you know, kind of makes the whole region crash itself, because if you don't like the characters that you see on screen and the characters that you're supposed to be around for like the entire story or for the entire region, you're just gonna dislike the region. Now, I'll also be talking about Lolly, which is an interesting character to me. Now, when Lolly first dropped, players really liked her. I mean, her design was cool, her personality was cool, but players found out that it took a sudden turn. And what I mean by sudden turn is people thought she was turned into bait. Players thought her whole personality changed. Lolly was this mean granny, and players really liked that aspect about her.
All
that she wasn't
unclaimed
like
articles
all
should
nice
be
to the
turned
traveler,
in.
but of course it switched
So-
up, and she was more nicer to the traveler.
One with
And players
nature.
didn't really like how she turned so sweet. They were expecting her to be like a mean granny and to act like her age, I guess, since she is around 500 years old. Correct me if I'm wrong, but she is an older character, and players were expecting her to have more wisdom instead of being
Act her age, bruh.
more of like a shy anime girl to some people. So let's talk about one of the most crucial people of an entire region, the Archon Moika. Now, Moika had a really bad startup. I mean, players didn't like her design at all. And her design, when players pointed out, she has a zipper that goes all the way to the back of her body, and players were really uncomfortable just thinking about how the design would actually work. The fact that she had a whole bodysuit or tracksuit that zipped all the way under, players really didn't like that, like, at all. Now, each of the Archons is one of the most favorited people of their entire region. Whenever an Archon drop, Genshin sales just absolutely rise and everyone pulls for an Archon, but this Archon had one of the worst banner sales in terms of Archons in a while. Of course, she was a really overpowered unit, but she wasn't, you know, likable to people. Now, people just thought she was just a boring Archon and she didn't have much character depth like the rest of the Archons, but what I will say is that she's one of the first Archons to introduce herself to us without any trouble, so I'll give her a round of applause for that. Now, the region itself actually built up a lot of disappointment as players didn't really like exploring Outland as much as the other regions. Now, a part of the main reason why is Outland felt out of place to people, and I will be going back to this part later, so stay tuned, but mainly, players didn't really like the architecture and overall feel of Outland. Players felt as if they could have taken a lot more from the culture that Outland was actually based off of. They could have added a lot more buildings to Outland to make it more visually appealing, and players felt like the most like big building was a stadium, and there wasn't much like, you know, design added to Outland. People liked the different tribes, but it wasn't enough to players. So the overall design in Outland had players severely disappointed, but mainly the exploration is what people got really. Now, the exploration in Outland is one of the most prominent issues that I've seen. So, people felt as if you had to pull for Outland characters due to the power of the Night Soul Blessing. Now, of course, Night Soul Blessing makes exploration 10 times easier. I mean, you have Shilonen riding walls, Kinich swinging through the open air with a How, and you have Mulaney surfing waves and stuff, and people really felt as if you would have had to pull for these Outland characters to make your exploration game 10 times easier. Now, of course, they gave out a free character, which was Kachina, but again, it wasn't as fast as the rest of the characters, and players really disliked the dependency that you would have to pull for the Outland characters to make your experience overall better. And this wasn't strictly to Outland, as the Spiral Abyss, it catered a lot to the Night Soul Blessing, and players really hated this, and they can't wait until the region's over so they can get rid of the whole Night Soul Blessing dependency. And this is even prominent in events, and I think the most latest event right now has a good amount of Night Soul Blessing reliance on it, and players just don't like the fact that there's so much Night Soul Blessing dependency in this game right now, and they just wish the game would break apart from it and go back to mainly catering to different elements instead of the Night Soul Blessing itself. So this region, it's already just, it's cooked already. I mean, players just hated it for all the different reasons I mentioned, but that's not only it, and I'll be getting into my next point now. Now let's talk about the story. Now, the story is one of the main things that carries the region itself on its back, and when the story isn't good, players will absolutely dislike it. And the biggest issue that I've seen with Outland is it didn't feel like the mission of the game. Now, let me break this down a little bit.
Adorn my night.
Completed the Outland story, I'm going to talk a little about it, so you might want to skip this part or play and then come back. Yeah, I mean come back. Anyways, we're going to be talking about it, so again, if you haven't finished it, then skip to this part. why people didn't feel like it was a nation of war is because the fact that it was only against the Abyss had people a little bit mad and a little disappointed. They wished that Notland would have had a little bit more creativity to it. Players were suggesting that the tribes could have been against each other along with the threat of the Abyss and make them all come together and fight against the Abyss, or have some discourse among the tribes and have the tribes fight against each other to have some type of war going on, like internally, instead of like having a conflict with, you know, a bigger force like the Abyss, or just something different in general. The fact that it was only the Abyss, they knew the issue would be resolved quickly, and it didn't really have that much of an emotional factor to it. Now, I didn't see specifically what people really disliked about the whole fact that it didn't feel like a nation of war, but I'm going to be breaking down a part of the reason why it kind of flopped to people. So, we're going to the whiteboard. Okay. Now, a part of the reason why Notland did so bad is because they didn't have a good emotional factor to it. Now, since it was a nation of war, of course, during war, there's a lot of lives that are unfortunately being removed from this world, and that's exactly what Notland did, but the way they did it wasn't that good, and the reason why I think players didn't really feel emotionally, sad by it, people didn't feel sad about it is because of how they used the emotional factor wrong. So, let's talk about it.
I hear everything.
You would need to get rid of some characters that people were connected to or had a sad backstory to. And since the Nation of War got rid of a lot of random NPCs that we didn't need, we didn't really feel an emotional connection to them and felt as if they were really relevant. Now, of course, this happens with the war.
Let's nip that in the bud.
You know, passing away, of course, you would feel sympathy for them, but since it's a game,
By royal decree, a bond is strong.
of course, it got rid of the
Process of
like
elimination.
but players didn't really like it at all, so it was kind of not that sad. But what players did, what Notland did do right is they hurt an animal. And when you hurt an animal,
I'll uproot you.
sad. Now what Fox did that Notland didn't do is have an emotional factor. Now, with that story, of course, players really disliked her when she first came out. They thought she was bratty, but they thought she was annoying, and players just really disliked her. And then we got to know her backstory and her whole plan with Folklore, and this made people really emotional since her backstory was so sad, and they used emotional factor correctly. And since Notland got rid of a lot of random NPCs, people didn't really like that.
I hear
And
everything.
that was a big issue, causing the nation to go, one of the players in the story just not that good. Now, of course, when we got to the end of the story, fighting against the Abyss monster, it was really cool, but
Bond is strong.
there was some scenes that players really cringed about. People were just expecting a sad ending for the Nation of War. I mean, I expected this game to have a really sad ending compared to the rest of the games, but it felt more like a happy ending. Besides Capitano dying, which that is an issue itself that I won't even get into, because I will be fully biased on my podcast. Now let's talk about one of the most main issues of Notland, which is the modernization of Genshin Impact. Now this is a really, really interesting thing to me, as players felt as if Notland was just too modern. I mean, there was a lot of odd things to people, I mean, including Mabuika's motorcycle, the whole spray paint, and the whole graffiti, considering what you would need to graffiti and how long that takes to actually develop, and players just felt as if Notland was just completely out of place, as well as the whole color scheme of Notland. It just felt so off to people, and you know, it just added on to the hate, and it didn't feel like a fantasy game to people, and this was a huge problem. What I did notice that actually played a crucial and vital part is the voice acting. Now this mainly caters to US-based players since they listen to the game in English. Now, considering the fact that there's a VA strike going on right now, voice acting strike, a lot of the characters are muted and just non-verbal right now, so they don't have a voice actor for those characters, and they are going to replace them. So the entire Notland story quest, it's just had players talking like when players don't have voice acting, the story kind of gets boring to them, and this actually plays a really huge part since voice acting is very crucial in games. I mean, we can compare it again. I'm sorry, I'm comparing a lot to Fontaine, but voice acting in Fontaine was phenomenal and just elevated the story a lot, and when people hear that voice acting, they get really hooked into the story.
Is this what justice means to you? Answer me, Nubilet!
And since the voice acting was muted due to the VA strike, It created a lot of hatred for Notland and players that, well, not really hatred, it just people didn't like the story as much and were immersed into the story, which is a direct cause to people hating Notland.
Hey!
And different factors like that, it just
Our
kind of
guests
adds
of
on
honor
to the
are
fact
here.
that people didn't
Now
like
we
the
can
region.
really
Now
get
for
this
the most
party
dreaded part of the
started.
video,
Hey,
my
little
opinion.
Lonnie.
Now,
Oh, and Shalana's
to
here
me,
too.
Notland wasn't as bad as I thought it would be,
That's right.
but I still didn't like
If I
it as
want
much
to
as I
help
did
people
with the
here,
other regions.
I definitely
Now,
can't neglect the Natlan branch of my practice.